Hey everybody, this is Perch. I get a lot of questions about demographics, and demographics is interesting because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but not a lot of hard numbers. When I say demographics, by the way, it means who's reading the comics, who's buying the comics. Um, I can give you my perspective. I'll tell you my story, and then I'll give you the perspective of some other comic retailers because this conversation comes up a lot in conversations with retailers. And then I'll tell you what kind of the industry is saying and why there's a bit of a disconnect between all three. And then I think there's some general pragmatic information in all this that says, you know, what would be great for comics? I'll answer. What would be great for comics is if there was no real demographic barrier at all, and we had a perfect blend of all the different genders, races, sex, everything. Um, and they were all available buying customers. They were all coming to the market and anxious to buy comics. That was the available market was everyone. That is the ideal. And this isn't. It's kind of a dumb statement to make. The best market is one that has everyone in it. Well, yeah. I mean, it's important to start with some common sense. Yes, ideally, comics were an option, a buying option for everyone. And to some extent, they are, meaning I believe today, right now, and for quite some time, the comics being produced could be picked up and read by everyone, but they're not. There's barriers to the different demographics who are actually buying these comics. So what are those barriers? Well, let me tell you kind of my story. From my shops, I've said this before. I think, and I'm saying this in relation to other comic shops in the area or other comic shops that I'm friends with the retailers with on groups, um, that I think I trended a larger, a higher percentage of female audience than many stores. Many stores report anywhere from 70-30 male to 80-20 male. And I'm talking now. I'm kind of going back through the 90s. It was definitely closer to 80-20. In the 2000s, that changed a bit. One thing that I think was always true with me and other retailers is that uh, the female part of the audience tended to be more interested in things like Vertigo or things like what Image was putting out. Image, I would say, in the 2000s, the Walking Dead had a decent amount of female readership. The historically, like Spider-Man, would trend male. Now, when I say trend male, hopefully no one's dumb enough to do this in the comments, but it's like I'm not saying 100-0. Nothing is 100-0. I had plenty of female fans who were into Gambit and the X-Men, and they would collect X-Men for that reason. And you could go to any comic shop and find that will hold up, be true. Donna Troy was another super popular character among women. And so people would pick up Teen Titans and other things. And so you'd have these comics that would come out. And you'd have different demographics that skew different ways. My number was always closer to 60-40, somewhere between 60-40 and 70-30, male, female. I don't know why. I would be absolutely lying to you if I said, well, it's because I had a progressive shop and was welcoming to everybody, but I wasn't. Well, I mean, I was welcoming to everybody, but I wasn't. There was no trick that I was using to get female readers into the store. It was just the store's open. Maybe the location just magically had something to do with it, but there's nothing I could put my finger on that would say, aha, here's what's going on. The only thing that I can come to, but in the Seattle area, the vast majority of comic shops, not all, but the vast majority of them, are well lit, nice shops. Those, I've complained about this before, but this perception or this narrative that gets thrown out that comic shops are like some dirty old man's basement and it's like super skeezy and women wouldn't dare to go there. I'm sure those places exist. I'm not saying they don't, but those are by and large the absolute minority of shops. Um, they're very, very few. They're very few. Now, in terms of race, When I was in certainly the Midwest type area, Colorado. Colorado's not the Midwest, but in that type of area, heavy Native American population. I would say that, again, I'm doing kind of back of the envelope math. You know, I don't know, 40% white, 30% Native American, and 30% kind of Latino is probably my audience in those shops. That demographics by race are almost entirely based on where the shop is. Up here in the Seattle area, very few Native Americans, much less Latino, and a much heavier audience of Asian in this area. I'd say for a long time the white and Asian population was pretty balanced in my shop, and then there would be a smaller African American and Indian population, Indian, as opposed to Native American population of demographics. Now, when you talk to other comic shops, generally speaking, the male to female breakdown sits in that somewhere around, somewhere about 70-30 is still what a lot of shops are reporting. Now, if you're a businessman and you're hearing that, the opportunity should be to get more female readers into your store. Why? Well, because if you've got 70% of one and 30%, it's not about being fair. It's not about trying to get to 50-50. It just means there's more available market of female customers that you could reach. So in theory, it should be easy to grab more female readers than male readers because you're already skewing higher on the male readership. This is, again, basic business. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's kind of what you got. In the country, in the United States, the majority of comic readers are white. But it closely mirrors the majority of if you just get a demographic by race breakdown of the country, you'll find that the comic shop audience, remarkably, when you kind of add it all together, starts to look a lot like just the general racial demographics of the country. It's very, very similar. It probably skews slightly more white, and part of that, most likely, I am totally guessing here, has to do with the fact that a lot of comic shops, at least the historical ones, were often put in kind of suburban neighborhoods and places that probably skewed more white. Again, I may be wrong, but that's my guess. The other piece to it is that, comic buyership tends to be something that, when you get a certain audience, you tend to keep that audience like 20, 30 years later. Collectors keep coming back. And so the demographics of your shop will look at least somewhat like the demographics of the neighborhood the shop was in when it first came out, when it first launched. That it tends to be very hard. In fact, this is a discussion point among retailers that's happened many times of how do you change your market? How do you actually, if the demographics in your neighborhood have shifted, how do you get the demographics in your shop to shift with it? It seems to lag behind. Again, in a collector business, this is normal. This would be, it's just your primary audience are people returning, not first-time customers. If they were first-time customers, then most likely the area around your shop would match pretty close to one-to-one with the people buying comics from your shop. But if you, say, had a comic shop in Denver, Denver is a town in Colorado that has had massive demographic changes in kind of the makeup of the town. But if you're a comic shop, like I know Mile High has faced this, that existed, 30 years ago, what you'll find is a heavy percentage of your customer base are the same customers that first found you 30 years ago. And those tended to be more white. Even if the neighborhood has shifted to be more Latino, more African American, whatever it happens to be, your audience, because they're collectors, keep coming back, and so it doesn't move as fast. That in theory is a problem. It's not a problem for justice reasons. It's a problem for business reasons. In business, you want to constantly be growing your market, and if you find that your market is really kind of remains trapped in who was coming to your store, say 30 years ago, then you worry. As a business owner, you worry about those people kind of aging out, dying. Like you just frankly, unfortunately, the dirty truth of it, you worry about these people dying. And if they die, and you're not replacing it with new customers, you have a problem. So it again sounds a little crass to say it that way, but that's kind of where the market is right now. You see a number of publishers trying their best to appeal to kind of the pride audience, to appeal to other races, to appeal to women. And it's not, again, you get why they do that. No, it's not because they're trying to social engineer the world. It's because they are looking to grow their market. Honestly, I understand the different theories on this, but honestly, at the end of the day, a lot of this, at least this part of it, does come down to kind of bean counting. It comes down to basic, how do you make more money with the market that you have? And the challenge is twofold. If you're, let's say, you're a publisher and you recognize the same thing that kind of I said about the comic shops, at least the anecdotal evidence I have, that your audience is 70-30 male. You might say to yourself, hey, I need to get more women reading comic books, and you'd be smart to say that, because if you can grow that audience, cool. I said there are two challenges. There's three challenges. The first is, hey, don't disrupt the 70% of male that you already have, meaning you don't want to lose that audience to gain the other. What you want to do is additive, gain the other. You want to keep the audience you have, and you want to grow. This will cause the percentage to get closer to 50-50 if you're able to grow the female market while not losing the male market. But the worst problem is if you decide to kind of sacrifice one for the other. That doesn't help you. Your market doesn't grow. You want your market to grow. On the other hand, you also don't want the 70% to prevent the growth of the 30%. And that is a challenge as well. So if you keep producing material that has no appeal outside of let's face it, a white male audience, well, you're going to get in trouble eventually, because as the demographics change around you, you're going to be stuck with that same, what will be a shrinking audience. So, but it's very important. You don't lose that audience. Don't do something to cause that audience to go away. I mean, the dumbest of all moves is you cause the 70% of your market to go away and you don't get the 30% to grow. And then you're just hosed both directions. And I think we've seen a lot of that lately. The other problem, though, is and this is kind of the uncomfortable truth. If you're going to produce content for women to try and grow your female audience, great. But where are they going to buy your content? Is your plan to get them to buy that content in the direct market, in your comic shop? Well, if your comic shop is very locked into a 70-30 mode and you're the publisher, then you've got to somehow work with the comic shop to fix their audience problems in order to sell your books. If you just try and make new books and then you sell them to the same channel that's locked into the 70-30 mix, well, you're basically hoping that the comic shop is going to go along with you and somehow find a magical way to market and bring in a demographic that they don't currently have in order to sell what you've made. Sounds great, but in most cases, the publishers do not actually communicate any of their plans to the comic shop. And so the direct market has no idea what the publisher is really doing outside of a random kind of offering of solicitations and the occasional press release, which more often than not, the comic shop is caught unawares. They're learning about these plans on Twitter at the same time everybody else is. So you're not really giving them the opportunity to grow their audience. And if you're not giving them the opportunity to grow their audience, when you produce these books, you're selling it into a market that has a 70-30 split, even if you're trying to appeal to a, in theory, growing female audience. That's a problem. There's a bunch of issues here. The other question I think that people have to ask is, and this is maybe the most dodgy of all, if your goal is, hey, I want to sell comics to women, because right now there's a huge market in comics. There's a huge audience that aren't buying comics, so I want them to buy comics. They're women. How do we get more women to buy comics? That sounds great. It's a nice statement, but you have to ask yourselves a couple questions. Number one, are the things that I'm doing, is the content I'm producing, does it appeal to women? I feel like a lot of the content that gets created, in theory, for the for the LGBTQ audience or for the female audience, or even with some of the other races, they'll come out with comics that in theory are supposed to appeal to them, but they don't. I think that's a different problem. This is one of those cases where, again, anecdotally, you go into your comic shop and you ask, hey, what are people picking up? And I think there's this weird misconception within comic publishers that it's like, hey, if I just put out this comic and the comic has a Latino lead in it, that all the Latino people will be excited because they see a Latino superhero and they'll come buy it. And I don't know if that's true. Well, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's not true by the evidence of what we've seen over the last couple of years. Um, Latino markets, LGBTQ audiences, women, you can't just roll out a comic and say, hey, this got a woman in it. She's a strong woman. So you're a woman. This is a strong woman. Buy this woman. That's not how anyone thinks. Male, female, any race. That's not going to work. You've got to find a way to appeal to this market that goes a little bit more deep than simply, hey, look, the superhero looks more or less like you. Problem solved. That's actually not going to. We've got plenty of evidence to suggest you've got to do other things than that. Tell different stories. I mean, there's a lot of different models, but it's not enough to just make the character vaguely look like whatever market you're trying to target and call it a day. That's not going to be successful. So I feel like there's at least two barriers, and they're kind of a third problem to doing this. The demographics in comic shops, they will change, and they definitely are changing. Like I said, I skewed more to women than most of my peers do. I wish I could point to why. Like, I wish I could say, well, I alphabetized the books, and that appeals to women. That's not how it works. So I don't have any kind of surefire answer. I suspect more than anything, it was just the location happened to do that, but I don't know. I mean, I was having this conversation with another retailer, and they're like, "What are you doing what are you doing in your shop to have more female readers come in, more female customers? Like, are you sweeping the floor more often?" And I just remember laughing just very very hard. So it was one of those luncheons down at one of the cons. I think it was one of the ones at Comic Pro. Was it Comics Pro? I think it was one of the ones they put on. Um, it was just, I'll always remember that. It's like the way, so every now and then somebody will say something like, how do we get more female customers? I'm like, you sweep the floor. You sweep the floor really good. That's what I hear. That's what women like. Clean floors. Yeah, no, that's not how it works. But anyway, that's my kind of anecdotal answer. I wish I, again, had something better for you, but that's generally how it's breaking down. I think that there's a lot of pressure on the publisher side where they do not want to admit or just say, hey, we know our current audience is 60-40 or 70-30, somewhere in that range. We know that's where we're currently at. And so we're trying to figure out ways to, grow the audience that has more growth potential. No, nobody will just come out and say it that way. And I wish they would, because it's honest. It's not sexist. It's not racist. It's, if you say, hey, we would like to sell more comics to the Latino market. Cool. How do we do that? Well, have an open discussion about it. You probably will get some good ideas from retailers if you're a publisher. And if you're a retailer, you probably get good ideas from your customers. But I think people have to ask the question and be willing to listen, and then not treat it like this taboo topic. To date, because this is from another presentation that Diamond had put on, I remember some retailer said something to the effect of, we don't have a big, female audience. How do we get a big female audience? And they're like, no, you can't ask that question. Just can't ask. You shouldn't ask the question. And you absolutely should be asking that question. It's a good question. Pretending, as I see some people do, pretending that the audience is just already perfect. It's already 50-50. Everything is one completely even split across the board. Well, anyone with a brain knows that's not true. So if we're going to actually tackle it, we got to be honest with ourselves first. Anyway, that's what I think. Let me know your questions below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.